Hello. Um, Sorry I haven't gotten to post in the last couple of days. It's been a busy couple of days where God is definitely moving. It's even been difficult to upload our YouTube videos, devotionals that we record each morning. Let me text Crystal and let her know that I am here. I don't know why it's been difficult to upload those morning devotional videos. We've recorded them. Just don't seem to be uploading. We'll figure it out. We're new to YouTube. That's why we don't worry about getting everything exactly perfect. But we did get some lights in, so that's cool. My friend George, the World War II veteran, his lawyer gave us this little trinket from his house. Little buffalo. Set in motion. That from my grandma. So we're in Leviticus chapter 9. We've got our bookmark. The first sacrifice is offered by Aaron and his sons, chapter 9. 8 days later, Moses called together Aaron, his sons, and Israel's leaders. Then he said to Aaron, "Find a young bull and a ram that have nothing wrong with them. Offer the bull to the Lord as a sacrifice for sin, and the ram as a sacrifice to please him. Tell the people of Israel that they must offer sacrifices as well. They must offer a goat as a sacrifice for sin, and a bull and a ram as a sacrifice to please the Lord." Excuse me, I can't wait till I have my surgery to do away with all this stuff going on. The bull and the ram must be a year old and have nothing wrong with them. Then the people must offer a bull and a ram as a sacrifice to ask the Lord's blessing, and also a grain sacrifice mixed with oil. Do this because the Lord will appear to you today. After the animals and the grain had been brought to the front of the sacred tent, and the people were standing there in the presence of the Lord, Moses said, "The Lord has ordered you to do this, so that he may appear to you in all of his glory. Aaron, step up to the altar and offer the sacrifice to please the Lord. Then offer the sacrifices for the forgiveness of your sins and for the sins of the people, just as the Lord has commanded." Aaron stepped up to the altar and killed the bull that was to be the sacrifice for his sins. His sons brought him the blood. He dipped a finger in it, smeared some on the four corners of the bronze altar, and poured out the rest at his foot. But he sent up in smoke the fat, the kidneys, and the lower part of the liver, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. Then Aaron burned the skin and the flesh outside the camp. After Aaron had killed the ram that was sacrificed to please the Lord, Aaron's sons brought him the blood, and he splattered it against all four sides of the altar. They brought him each piece of the animal, including the head, and he burned them all on the altar. He washed the insides and the hind legs, and also sent them up in smoke. Next, Aaron sacrificed the goat for the sins of the people, as he had done with the sacrifice for his own sins. And so he burned the sacrifice on the altar in the proper way. He also presented the grain sacrifice and burned a handful of the flour on the altar as part of the morning sacrifice. At last, he killed the bull and the ram as a sacrifice to ask the Lord's blessing on the people. Aaron's sons brought him the blood, and he splattered it against the four sides of the altar. His sons placed all the fat, as well as the kidneys and the lower part of the liver, on top of the choice ribs. Then Aaron burned the fat on the altar and lifted up the ribs and the right hand leg to show that these were dedicated to the Lord. This was done just as the Lord had instructed Moses. Aaron held out his hand and gave the people his blessing before coming down from the bronze altar where he had offered the sacrifices. He and Moses went into the sacred tent, and when they came out, they gave the people their blessing. Then the Lord appeared to the people in all of his glory. The Lord sent fiery flames that burned up everything on the altar. And when everyone saw this, they shouted and fell to their knees to worship the Lord. Nadab and Abihu, chapter 10. Nadab and Abihu were two of Aaron's sons, but they disobeyed the Lord by burning incense to him on a fire pan when they were not supposed to. Suddenly the Lord sent fiery flames and burned them to death. Then Moses told Aaron that this was exactly what the Lord had meant when he said, I demand respect from my priests, and I will be praised by everyone. Aaron was speechless. Moses sent for Michael and Elzaphan, the two sons of Aaron's uncle Uzziel. Then he told them, take these two dead relatives of yours outside the camp, far from the entrance to the sacred tent. So they dragged the dead men away by their clothes. Then Moses told Aaron and his other two sons, Eleazar and Ithamar, don't show your sorrow by messing up your hair and tearing your priestly clothes, or the Lord will get angry. He will kill the three of you and punish everyone else. It's all right for your relatives, the people of Israel, to mourn for those he destroyed by fire. But you are the Lord's chosen priests, and you must not leave the sacred tent, or you will die. Aaron and his two sons obeyed Moses. The Lord told Aaron, when you or your sons enter the sacred tent, you must never drink beer or wine. If you do, you will die right there. This law will never change. You must learn the difference between what is holy and what isn't holy, and between the clean and the unclean. You must also teach the people of Israel everything that I commanded Moses to say to them. Moses told Aaron and his two sons, Eleazar and Ithamar, the grain sacrifice that was offered to give thanks to the Lord is very holy. So make bread without yeast from the part that wasn't sent up in the smoke, and eat it beside the altar. The Lord has said that this belongs to you and your sons, and that it must be eaten in a holy place. But the choice ribs and the hind leg that were lifted up may be eaten by your entire family, as long as you do so in an acceptable place. These parts are yours from the sacrifices that the people offer to ask the Lord's blessing. This is what the Lord has commanded, and it will never change. When Moses asked around and learned that the ram for the sin sacrifice had already been burned on the altar, he became angry with Eleazar and Ithamar and said, why didn't you eat the meat from this sacrifice in an acceptable place? It is very holy, and the Lord has given you this sacrifice to remove Israel's sin and guilt. Whenever an animal's blood isn't brought into the sacred tent, I commanded you to eat its meat in an acceptable place, but you burned it instead. Their father Aaron replied, today two of my sons offer the sacrifice for sin and the sacrifice to please the Lord. And look what has happened to me. Would the Lord have approved if I had eaten the sacrifice for sin? Moses was satisfied with Aaron's reply. Clean and unclean animals, chapter 11. The Lord told Moses and Aaron to say to the community of Israel, you may eat any animal that has divided hoofs and chews the cud, but you must not eat animals such as camels, rock badgers, and rabbits that chew the cud but don't have divided hoofs. And you must not eat pigs. They have divided hoofs but don't chew the cud. All of these animals are unclean, and you are forbidden even to touch their dead bodies. You may eat anything that lives in water and has fins and scales, but anything else that lives in water and let me try that again. You may eat anything that lives in water and has fins and scales, but it would be disgusting for you to eat anything else that lives in water, and you must not even touch their dead bodies. Eagles, vultures, buzzards, crows, ostriches, hawks, seagulls, owls, pelicans, storks, herons, hoopoes, and bats are also disgusting, and you are forbidden to eat any of them. The only winged insects you may eat are locusts, grasshoppers, and crickets. All other winged insects that crawl are too disgusting for you to eat. Don't even touch the dead bodies of animals that have divided hooves but don't chew the cud. And don't touch the dead bodies of animals that have paws. If you do, you must wash your clothes, but you are still unclean that evening, until evening. Moles, rats, mice, and all kinds of lizards are unclean. Anyone who touches their dead bodies or anything touched by their dead bodies becomes unclean until evening. If something made of wood, cloth, or leather touches one of their dead bodies, it must be washed, but it is still unclean until evening. If any of these animals is found dead in a clay pot, the pot must be broken to pieces, and everything in it becomes unclean. If you pour out water from this pot on any food, that food becomes unclean, and anything drinkable in the pot becomes unclean. If the dead body of one of these animals touches anything else, including ovens and stoves, that thing becomes unclean and must be destroyed. A spring or a cistern where one of these dead animals is found is still clean, but anyone who touches the animal becomes unclean. If the dead body of one of these animals is found lying on seeds that have been set aside for planting, the seeds remain unclean. But seeds that are soaking in water become unclean if the dead animal is found in the water. If an animal that may be eaten happens to die and you don't touch it, you become unclean until evening. If you eat any of its meat or carry its body away, you must wash your clothes, but you are still unclean until evening. Don't eat any of these disgusting little creatures that crawl or walk close to the ground. If you eat any of them, you will become just as disgusting and unclean as they are. I'm the Lord your God, and you must dedicate yourselves to me and be holy, just as I am holy. Don't become disgusting by eating any of these unclean creatures. I brought you out of Egypt so that I could be your God. Now you must become holy because I am holy. I have given these laws so that you will know what animals, birds, and fish are clean and may be eaten, and which ones are unclean and may not be eaten. What women must do after giving birth, chapter 12. The Lord told Moses to say to the community of Israel, if a woman gives birth to a son, she is unclean for 7 days, just as she is during her monthly period. Her son must be circumcised on the 8th day, but her loss of blood keeps her from being completely clean for another 33 days. During this time, she must not touch anything holy or go to the place of worship. Any woman who gives birth to a daughter is unclean for 2 weeks, just as she is during her period. And she won't be completely clean for another 66 days. When the mother has completed her time of cleansing, she must come to the front of the sacred tent and bring to the priest a year-old lamb as a sacrifice to please me, and a dove or a pigeon as a sacrifice for sin. After the priest offers the sacrifices to me, the mother will become completely clean from her loss of blood, whether the child is a boy or a girl. If she cannot afford a lamb, she can offer 2 doves or 2 pigeons, one as a sacrifice to please me, and the other as a sacrifice for sin. Skin diseases, 13. The Lord told Moses and Aaron to say to the people, if sores or boils on a skin rash should break out and start spreading on your body, you must be brought to Aaron or to one of the other priests. If the priest discovers that the hair in the infected area has turned white and that the infection seems more than skin deep, he will say, this is leprosy, you're unclean. But if the infected area is white and only skin deep, and if the hair in it hasn't turned white, the priest will order you to stay away from everyone else for 7 days. If the disease hasn't spread by that time, he will order you to stay away from everyone else for another 7 days. Then if the disease hasn't gotten any worse or spread, the priest will say, you were clean. It was only a sore. After you wash your clothes, you may go home. However, if the disease comes back, you must return to the priest. If it is discovered that the disease has started spreading, he will say, this is leprosy, you're unclean. Any of you with a skin disease must be brought to the priest. If he discovers that the sore spot is white with pus, and that the hair around it is also white, he will say, this is leprosy, you are unclean, and must stay away from everyone else. But if the disease has run its course and only the scars remain, he will say, you are clean. If the sores come back and turn white with pus, he will say, this is leprosy, you're unclean. However, if the sores heal and only white spots remain, the priest will say, you are now clean. If you have a sore that either swells or turns reddish white after it was healed, then you must show it to a priest. If he discovers that the hair in the infected area is turned white and that the infection seems more than skin deep, he will say, "This is leprosy, you are unclean." But if the white area is only on the surface of the skin and hasn't gotten any worse, and if the hair in it hasn't turned white, he will have you stay away from everyone else for 7 days. If the sore begins spreading during this time, the priest will say, "You're unclean because you have a disease." But if it doesn't spread and only a scar remains, he will say, "You're now clean." If you have a burn that gets infected and turns red or reddish white, a priest must examine it. If he discovers that the hair in the infected area is turned white and that the infection seems more than skin deep, he will say, "The burn has turned into leprosy and you are unclean." But if the priest finds that the hair in the infected area hasn't turned white and that the sore is only skin deep and it is healing, he will have you stay away from everyone else for 7 days. On the seventh day, the priest will examine you again, and if the infection is spreading, he will say, "This is leprosy, you're unclean." However, if the infection hasn't spread and has begun to heal, and if only a scar remains, he will say, "Only a scar remains from the burn, and you are clean." If you have a sore on your head or chin, it must be examined by a priest. If the infection seems more than skin deep and the hair in it has thinned out and lost its color, he will say, "This is leprosy, you're unclean." On the other hand, if he discovers that the itchy spot is only skin deep, but that the hair still isn't healthy, he will order you to stay away from everyone else for 7 days. By that time, if the itch hasn't spread, if the hairs seem healthy, and if the itch is only skin deep, you must shave off the hairs around the infection, but not those on it. Then the priest will tell you to stay away from everyone else for another 7 days. By that time, if the itch hasn't spread and seems no more than skin deep, he will say, "You are clean, now you must wash your clothes." Later, if the itch starts spreading, even though the hair is still healthy, the priest will say, "You are unclean." But if he thinks you are completely well, he will say, "You are clean." If the white spots break out on your skin, but the priest discovers that it is only a rash, he will say, "You are clean." If you become bald on any part of your head, you are still clean. But if a priest discovers that a reddish white sore has broken out on the bald spot and looks like leprosy, he will say, "This is leprosy, you're unclean." If you ever have leprosy, you must tear your clothes, leave your hair uncombed, cover the lower part of your face, and go around shouting, "I'm unclean, I'm unclean." As long as you have the disease, you are unclean and must live alone outside the camp. If a greenish or reddish spot appears anywhere on any of your clothing or on anything made of leather, you must let the priest examine the clothing or the leather. He will put it aside for 7 days, and if the mildew is spread in that time, he will say, "This is unclean because the mildew has spread." Then he will burn the clothing or the piece of leather. If the priest discovers that the mildew hasn't spread, he will tell you to wash the clothing or leather and put it aside for another 7 days, after which he will examine it again. If the spot hasn't spread, but is still greenish or reddish, the clothing or leather is unclean and must be burned. But if the spot has faded after being washed, he will tear away the spot. Later, if the spot reappears elsewhere on the clothing or the leather, you must burn it. Even if the spot completely disappears after being washed, it must be washed again before it is clean. These are the rules for deciding if clothing is clean or unclean after a spot appears on it. The ceremony for people healed by leprosy, chapter 14. The Lord told Moses to say to the people, "After you think you are healed of leprosy, you must ask for a priest to come outside the camp and examine you. And if you are well, he will have someone bring out 2 live birds that are acceptable for sacrifice, together with a stick of cedar wood, a piece of red yarn, and a branch from a hyssop plant. The priest will have someone kill one of the birds over a clay pot of spring water. Then he will dip the other bird, the cedar, the red yarn, and the hyssop in the blood of the dead bird. Next, he will sprinkle you 7 times with blood and say, 'You are now clean.' Finally, he will release the bird and let it fly away. After this, you must wash your clothes, shave your entire body, and take a bath before you are completely clean. You may move back into camp, but you must not enter your tent for 7 days. Then you must once again shave your head, face, and eyebrows, as well as the hair on the rest of your body. Finally, wash your clothes and take a bath, and you will be completely clean. On the 8th day, you must bring to the priest 2 rams and a year-old female lamb that have nothing wrong with them. Also, bring a half pint of olive oil and 6 pounds of your finest flour mixed with oil. Then the priest will present you and your offerings to me at the entrance to my sacred tent. There he will offer one of the rams together with the pint of oil as a sacrifice to make things right. He will also lift them up to show that they are dedicated to me. This sacrifice is very holy. It belongs to the priest and must be killed in the same place where animals are killed as sacrifices for sins and as sacrifices to please me. The priest will smear some of the blood from this sacrifice on your right earlobe, some on your right thumb, and some on the big toe of your right foot. He will then pour some of the olive oil into the palm of his left hand, dip a finger on his right hand into the oil, and sprinkle some of it 7 times toward the sacred tent. Next, he will smear some of the oil on your right earlobe, some on your right thumb, and some on the big toe on your right foot, and pour the rest of the oil from his palm on your head. Then he will offer the other 2 animals. One is a sacrifice for sin, and the other is a sacrifice to please me, together with a grain sacrifice. After this, you will be completely clean. If you are poor and cannot afford to offer this much, you may offer a ram as a sacrifice to make things right, together with a half pint of olive oil and 2 pounds of flour mixed with oil as a grain sacrifice. The priest will then lift these up to dedicate them to me. Depending on what you can afford, you must also offer 2 doves or 2 pigeons, one as a sacrifice for sin and the other as a sacrifice to please me. The priest will offer these to me in front of the sacred tent on the 8th day. The priest will kill this ram, for he will lift it up, and he will lift it up with olive oil in dedication to me. Then he will smear some of the blood on your right earlobe, some on your right thumb, and some on the big toe of your right foot. The priest will pour some of the olive oil into the palm of his left hand, then dip a finger of his right hand in the oil and sprinkle some of it 7 times toward the sacred tent. He will smear some of the oil on your right earlobe, some on your right thumb, and some on the big toe of your right foot, just as he did with the blood of the sacrifice to make things right. And he will pour the rest of the oil from his palm on your head. Then, depending on what you can afford, he will offer either the doves or the pigeons together with the grain sacrifice. One of the birds is a sacrifice for sin, and the other is a sacrifice to please me. After this, you will be completely clean. These are the things you must do if you have leprosy and cannot afford the usual sacrifices to make you clean. I gotta stop. Mary needs help. Her tummy rumbling.